Onur Yazıcıgil is an Istanbul-based typographer and design educator. He was born in 1983. Onur spent his early years drawing letters in Dhahran and Ankara. Early signs of passion that led him to move to the States in 2006 to study the historical evolution of Latin sans serif typefaces at Purdue University. After completion of his MFA, he was recruited to teach at the Sabancı University. I hope I said that right. Where he has been teaching graphic design and typography classes since 2009. In 2016, he embarked on a thesis exploring the history of the Ottoman Naskh typefaces at Mimar Sinan University, where he completed his PhD in 2020. Please help me welcome Onur!
Thanks for having me at this beautiful university at UB. I was here about 5-6 years ago, and I had a fabulous time, and I'm so happy to be back here. And I'm honored to speak at this beautiful conference. And it's an incredibly difficult task to organize such a conference because I do a similar one in Istanbul, where I'm from. So yeah, I really appreciate the hard work everybody has been putting. Okay, so Transcending Istanbul Ottoman Nask Typefaces beyond the city's borders. Today, essentially, I'm going to talk about, briefly, I'm going to talk about what constitutes the Ottoman, the Naskh type style and the Ottoman typefaces that were created. And what I mean by when I say Ottoman, I mean specifically the typefaces that were created in Istanbul, which was the capital city of the empire in the 19th and the early 20th century. So those are the formal book text typefaces, but I will also then talk about, which is the core part of the talk, is how those typefaces got exported, just like contemporary fonts are exported to various countries. You design a typeface in Cairo, and then you ship it to the US, and then the US market starts using it. So the Istanbul typefaces that were created in Istanbul predominantly by Armenian type makers. I'm going to introduce the key actors, those Armenian type makers in Istanbul, and how their fonts became actually the best sellers in Beirut and in Cairo in the 19th century. So all of this research is from a small section that I wrote from the chapter that I wrote for this new book that actually literally got published and printed today, which is called Arabic Typography, History and Practice, edited by Titus Nimet and co-authored by Titus, Emanuele Laconidi, Bornezat Pana, myself. Jerry Leonidas wrote an introduction, and Robert Bringhurst wrote the preface of the book. So it just got published today, so I'm happy about that too. And it's a good coincidence. Thank you. So I thought every speaker gets 30 minutes, and then I just found out that 20 minutes. And the more I talk not about my work, I know I'm wasting more time. But I'm going to try to keep it as brief as possible. But the reason why I'm showing this image is because we need to understand, when we talk about the context of Ottoman calligraphy, Ottoman Arabic calligraphy or Ottoman Arabic type design, we need to understand what constitutes the Ottoman style, the formal construction, the formal style. Because when it comes to various calligraphy styles, like say Toulouse or Naskh, certain regions, they end up like building up their own flavors. Like there is the Iranian Naskh has a completely different flavor. The Indian Naskh has a different flavor. The Istanbul Ottoman Naskh has a different flavor. So I need to I want to introduce you briefly to the flavors of the Ottoman, which is the typical thing is that you would see. If you want to see and assess if it's a calligraphy, a manuscript that was written in Istanbul, the first thing that you may want to do is actually take a look at the isolated nun. If you see the dot clearly placed on the right stem of the block, chances are we're talking about an Ottoman calligraphy style. and you would never see a zulfe, which is the serif on a kef, but on the display versions of Naskh, which would be thulus, you would see the zulfe, the serifs on the top. These are like small little things that helps you understand the calligraphy tradition that comes from Istanbul. So my PhD was on constructing the genealogical relationships of all the Ottoman metal typefaces that were created in Istanbul between 1728 and until the script reform, 1928, because Turks, after 1928, they switched from the Arabic script to the Latin script. So we were talking about 200 years. So, and I ended up I ended up servicing new typefaces that were not known, they were not popular, or their type makers were not known, and so I ended up like finding these are the typefaces that were created in Istanbul, and then what I did is that I put them on a two-dimensional space and tried to relate which one was the most influential one, and how I came up with that was whichever came first, and then how that passed some of its letter styles and its visual features onto next generations. And then it turns out that, as you can clearly see, the blue, the typeface that is 24 points that was created by Mühendisyan in 1867 became basically in the Istanbul market, it became the most influential typeface. But not only in the Istanbul market, and but also in neighboring regions such as in the Balkans, or in Alexandria, in Cairo, in Beirut as well. These are the key actors. They're the celebrities, the superstars of the Ottoman type making world, and they're all Armenian. As you can see their names, and I couldn't find, unfortunately, the photography wasn't invented when Bogos Arabian lived, so I couldn't find an illustration of him either. But they're basically responsible for the typographic culture, I would say, in Istanbul, especially in Istanbul, because all the newspapers, the quality of the typefaces, the reading culture, the simplification and the economization of the type making with metal, they're basically responsible for it. And this is the Fine Arts Academy in Istanbul. I found this image during my PhD, and it was really exciting because it's the only image that remains from Ottoman Type Foundry. And then I found that it was actually a Parisian typecaster. So they were importing, their typecasting machines were imported from Paris. So that also helped me understand it's not like they came up with all their own machines. But this is from the turn of the century, meaning like 1900s. But in the 1860s and 1880s, it was really like hand molds, and it was completely like handcrafted. Okay, there are basically two phases that I'm going to mention today. One is going to be very brief, which is Bogos Arabian's Naskh type. He created only one 16-point Naskh type, which actually was used 80 years in Istanbul. In newspapers, it was used in the first newspaper, it was used in the first, not the first printed books, because that was Ibrahim Müteferrika. But Arabian's type actually became one of like the defaults of the printing culture, the printers in Istanbul. But then what I did is that I started to look into the archives in Germany and Austria and in Egypt and anywhere. Like I'm just like looking anywhere I can. And only these three countries that I was able to find Arabian's typeface used from books that were printed in these countries. So I'm going to briefly show that, and then I'm going to jump into Mühendisyan's, which is going to be the dominating part of this my talk, because again, his highly influential work. this is Arabian's 16-point Naskh type, and it was based on a well-known Ottoman calligrapher, Sayyid Deli Osman, which is like Osman that went insane, so they would call him Insane Osman. That was his nickname, but his name was Sayyid. And what I did is that I found his models, and then I tried to compare them to Arabians. And this is actually how I would know that Arabian based his typeface on Sayyid Osman, because Sayyid Osman's work looked like any other well-known Ottoman calligrapher's Naskh. Basically, I found and I looked into court archives, and they were well documented there. And they were like, it would mention how he took his samples and then he based his typeface on that. And then Arabian's typeface appeared in Egypt as early as 1828, when he was still alive. Bogaz Arabian was still alive. And it's the first printed newspaper in Egypt, Vekaya Misriye, at the Bulak Press. And but interestingly, and then I found Arabian's typeface in the History of Bonaparte book, printed in Alexandria in 1833. But then I realized that it's like 97% Arabian, but then there's a 3% deviation, like it's like diverging strangely. There are like discrepancies. And then Titus Niemet he scrutinized and he made a thorough analysis of the Arabian types that appeared in various countries. And then he found out that, especially the ones in Bulak, he compared the Bulak Arabian with the original Arabian from Istanbul. And he found out that actually, as you can see in the bottom, it was a copied version. It was influenced. It's not necessarily, it wasn't recast. It was basically a copied version. And so that made a difference. And it's so difficult for the naked eye to say that. I looked at it and I'm like, oh, that's Arabian. But then it takes someone else to go and scrutinize it like that. I did this process for all the Mühendisyan types, but Titus did this before me, and then he shared it with me, and I'm like, okay, so now we know how to approach this whole field, so that was really good. Then I found in Germany incredibly crisp printed versions of Arabian. So this indicates, and this is like 100% Arabian. It's not like the Bulak press version of Arabian. It's the Istanbul version, and which suggests that these typefaces were either like faithfully copied in Germany, or they were basically imported from Istanbul. Okay, so I'm going to go to now Mühendisyan is the excuse my default font. It's not my computer. Mühendisyan is a very well known, not only a type maker but an engraver as well. So he was a master punch cutter, and he worked and he had access to the master calligrapher, whose name is Kazasker Mustafa İzzet Efendi. And Mühendisyan created his Naskh, this Naskh that you see in 24 points, and it was so crisp that it was sometimes it would be difficult for an untrained eye to understand whether it was written or typed. And this is what you see below is Mustafa İzzet Efendi, the calligrapher, the great, one of the greatest Naskh calligraphers in Istanbul at the time. He had access to his samples and his patterns, and he basically created his typeface based on that. And you can see printed Mühendisyan's 24-point type, fully vocalized, and you can see the lithographic version of an Ottoman Naskh, and they were more or less printed in the same time period. Lithographic edition essentially means handwriting, so it's basically a transfer of the handwriting to stone, and then you mass produce it from there. just like the photocopy machine. You write something with your hand, and then you put it in the photocopy machine, you mass produce it. But you can see the differences there. That is a good example. So this I was able to find, and I was ecstatic about this, is that it shows Mühendisyan's mind. It explains his segmentation rule and principles of his segmentation, and what it took for a proper Ottoman Naskh style to visually represent it. This is the amount of sorts that you needed. But what's really important is that you need to also pay attention to these decorative brackets, because those are also the signature of the type maker. And that's when you can see who, like if you also see a typeface that has a very particular cue or a very, say, particular decorative bracket like that, you can then, it just makes the researcher's life easier. Oh, okay, so most likely this is coming from there. Of course, there is common sense as well, but when it comes to decoration, it is also important to try to see which one appeared first. So it becomes a little difficult, but when I saw these in the type synopsis, it helped my life actually. This is Mühendisyan's engraving practice as well. He also engraved Ottoman banknotes in metal, and then he printed these banknotes. And this piece, and this is actually his signature, Hovhannes Mühendisyan there. And this piece was exhibited in the London Exposition in 1862. They asked Istanbul to send a craftsman's work, and they ended up sending, instead of the printed banknotes, they ended up sending this. Okay, so again, it's important when it comes to understanding how to evaluate and assess which typeface comes from where. It's also important to understand that not everything is movable type, and some of the pieces are like clichés. They're like single piece, one-time created metal cliché, and then if it's a frequently used besmele in this case, then that would be part of the type case. That would be the part of the font. So you would ship the font with that. And then, but this is movable type. And then you see these two pieces. Now, try to pay attention to these because we're going to see them quite often. And they're Mühendisyan's signatures, decorative brackets for the 24-point type. In Beirut, so this piece, this book that was printed in 1890 actually revealed everything. That it became like the Rosetta Stone of the Near East Naskh type culture, because the book mentions a type called type Beirutin, type Egyptian and American, and Constantinople. So all the typefaces that I've been seeing in this part of the country, like Beirut, especially printers in Beirut. Now it helped me understand, like, why they named those typefaces after those particular names here. So let's take a look at first of all, I'm going to start with type the Constantinople, which is the type that it suggests that it comes from Istanbul. But what I did, and I immediately saw that this is, okay, it says 22 point, but I was like, okay, this is a good copy of 24 point of Mühendisyan. So what I did is that I superimposed all the segmentations, and then it was like 98% matching. And this is a good book where I basically compared all these almost like 300 sorts, which is enough for me. And then I just found out that besides the isolated nun, again, it's really important, it's basically a full copy of Mühendisyan's. In the one on the original Ottoman version would always have the dot on the right stem, and you would see the Beirut version, or you would say the modified version. I like to call that the modified version, because you get a product and sometimes you modify it according to your own needs. It could be cultural, visual needs, whatever. This is really interesting, type Beirutin. So this is, I believe, and this is, right now I'm speculating, so that's my disclaimer. This typeface, I believe, was created specifically in Beirut. I don't know who created it. If there's anyone who hasn't done any, like if you guys haven't looked into this, it's a beautiful area to scrutinize this 9-point Naskh. I found that 9-point Naskh in an en premier Catholic's book printed in 1885, which then again indicates that the type is as old as 1885. 1885 is considered old in this context. I'll come to that later. Well, I found the typeface on the back. And how can you tell that it's this Beirutine 9-point? These final letters that are chalked. Show me everyone. There's the line. There's here. These chalk. They're not just like broken pieces. The whole typeface was constructed that way, so that it can fit, and it's an amazing stylistic an attitude, a very stylistic attitude, and it works. I mean, I think it's very legible, and but again, this is not my topic, but it's something really important. If I were you, if haven't looked into this, I would definitely do some research on this typeface. Type American is actually it's a really well-known typeface that was created by Homan Halok, American punch cutter, who came to Izmir, Smyrna, and he worked with Elias Smith, and they worked on Ottoman patterns from Istanbul, and then he created a typeface that later was called American Arabic. So this is the American Arabic, and there are like 4 versions of it in different point sizes. This is, compared to Mühendisyan's Naskh, it has some interesting and very advantageous features. Now, I do want to again mention that none of the typefaces that were created in Istanbul, none of them had swash characters. And when you think about it, swash characters are for isolated as well as final letters. It's just incredibly helpful for proper justification when you're setting a book. I don't know why none of the type makers in Istanbul did that, but this typeface became a bestseller in Beirut, and predominantly the books printed in Beirut were printed with Homan Halok's American Arabic. Some of the features of the American Arabic, it has 2 lam alifs. So one that is fused with the preceding alif has an open wider version, and the other one is the default version. Ottoman type makers, they always stuck with the one on the right hand version. So you can see the final and the isolated swash characters, the lams, and also the final yeah. So these are like some of the brief features that briefly I want to mention. But one important thing is that, interestingly, American Arabic, although it was based, that's what Elias Smith's diary says, it was based on the patterns that they found in Istanbul. It has the alif has a serif. It has a zulfe in Ottoman Turkish would say, and it has a serif. But none of the Naskh types in Istanbul or none of the Naskh calligraphy culture would have a serif when it comes to Naskh. For Thulus, yes, you would have always that serif. But here, if you pay attention, you can see the alifs. All the alifs, the isolated, they have these small little serifs. So that I thought was interesting. Now, again, famous printers, very famous printers such as Hal Saris, he used American Arabic, Homan Halok's fonts, extensively because, as I said, it's a beautiful typeface actually, and it's a casual typeface. It doesn't have that really heavy-duty formal construction, and it's very flexible with the swash characters. It has beautiful advantageous features. So if influential printers such as Hal Saris, they all use the American Arabic font at the press called Al-Adabiye, that would be in Turkish version, I suppose. So Matba Al-Adabiye and Hal Saris switched. In 1891, he printed this diwan, and suddenly he switched his American Arabic font typographic layout design to full-fledged Mühendisyan version. But this typeface is not the Constantinople version. This is 99.99 faithful copy of Mühendisyan, except with the addition of swash characters. Now this is really interesting because these swash characters did not appear in Istanbul at all. And this is like, as I said, it's a beautiful copy of Mühendisyan's, and even the cliché is a really nice copy. You can see it's not identical. If you pay attention to the differences, the one on the bottom is Mühendisyan's original Besmele cliché from 1867, and the one on the top is from the book Sarkis printed in 1891. So what Sarkis did with this typeface is, and later in the court archives, because I did all this research is based on Ottoman court archives, like 80% of it is court archives. So I have my evidences, and I presented them in the book that I co-authored. So what I found out that, Sarkis was actually involved in the casting of type and making type and purchasing type, and he actually. I don't know whether he did that or not, but he was basically one of the most influential printer in Beirut in the 1890s. But he modified, Mühendisyan's typefaces got modified. And then I found this in the court archive, which indicates how the Ottoman Sultan's oppression and its stringent rules, although the casting of Turkish, that this is written in Ottoman Turkish, and they didn't even write Arabic type. They wrote Turkish type because it didn't even occur to them. So they said, although the casting of Turkish types is prohibited, Halil Sarkis Efendi from the Armenian community and Bedvi Efendi, who respectively manage Lisan el-Hal and Al-Ahwal newspapers, have been reported for casting types. They and the Jesuit and American missionary schools have all been warned, and their types have been confiscated. This shows you how the palace in Istanbul was freaking out with the type production here. So they want to control and they want to oppress the type making because of the dissident publications. Mühendisyan's Naskh types in Cairo. Krikor Rafelian is really a new name for, no longer for me, but it's really a new name. And I accidentally found about this, I have to be honest. You can only do so much with looking into archives, but it just came to me. And Krikor Rafelian worked with Mühendisyan, so I did find that. He lived in Istanbul, born and raised in Istanbul, and died in Cairo. He's the guy who's responsible for shipping Mühendisyan's types to Cairo. And so because I did find Mühendisyan's types also in books printed in Cairo, but how do you need to prove that? I did find court archives shipping stuff, but I couldn't find the exact, the key actor in that. And then this guy shows up. I found a letter that he wrote to the Ministry of Education. I had been waiting for my check to be cashed for the 200 kıyye, which is about like 566 pounds, of type previously ordered by Yusuf Asaf Efendi for his newspapers, Ceridetül Mehakim, published in Egypt. Since the exportation was seized by the Ministry of Education, I could not cash my check. Hereby I'm begging the Ministry of Education to allow this shipment, as well as other shipments of type, to the aforementioned gentleman in Egypt. So this suggested that I'm on the right track. And then I found this a good friend who is also a co-author of the book, Borna Izzetpana. He randomly just posted this on Twitter. And he said, hey, I found this. This is a type specimen booklet printed in Cairo. Does anyone know anything about this? And I'm like, this tweet was back in 2018, just a couple years ago, when I was like looking into Mühendisyan's typefaces that were printed in Cairo. I was like, oh my God, that must be it. And then I went back to Borna's tweet, and then I asked Borna to send me the specimen, and then I scrutinized it. And this was like just amazing, because look what the specimen reveals here. I'm not going to, well, I'll just briefly mention that this is a promotional material, a material that is trying to promote its own typefaces. It's a type specimen, but it says something really interesting. It's the first foundry of its kind, founded in the year 1894. Perfect. Now we know when it was shipped. By Al-Marhum, the deceased, Krikor Rafelian, who is known in Egypt, and Al-Astana. Al-Astana means Istanbul. It means the city of power. During that time, there were no foundries in Egypt except the Egyptian foundry, which used to manufacture fonts and handmade molds, and the largest printing presses used to import their material from abroad, both from Al-Astana, that is what I was trying to understand, and from other manufacturing countries. Thus, the Istanbulian artman, the craftsman from Istanbul, Rafelian, basically, brought some of the machines from the foundry he used to manage in Al-Astana, and therefore he covered the needs of the newspapers and the printing presses and gained widespread fame, since there's no one except him in Egypt who masters this art with such excellence. So, and he was younger than Mühendisyan, a protege of Mühendisyan, worked with Mühendisyan, and Mühendisyan called him Master Type Founder. So you must see that how talented he must have been. And this is, again, it's a 99.99 copy. It's not even a copy. It's actually just the modified version of Mühendisyan with the swash characters. So the rest, if you superimpose with Mühendisyan's original type from 1867, it's identical. It just sits perfect. So, well, after Mühendisyan died, Krikor Rafelian, 3 years later, he got all the molds and all the equipment, and he went to Cairo, and he started his business there using Mühendisyan's types. But interestingly, again, he modified it there. Why? Again, it's interesting to see how why Istanbul type makers did not create swash characters. Again, these decorative brackets, he copied these decorative brackets. İntijah was printed in Cairo, and I'll just, yeah. One. Okay. All right, so basically you can see these, I'll just wrap it up. In Cairo, this book was again printed with Mühendisyan's 16 point and Kevorkian's 12 point. Lastly, I do want to mention, in 1957, Oxford University Press printed as Oriental, Greek and Oriental fonts specimen, ancient and modern. And there I did find that this well-known printer who used Mühendisyan's types in Cairo shipped the fonts, the 24-point font, to Oxford. And Oxford recast and printed that in 1928. And look what we have here. And everything. The rest is identical. So this just basically, just to briefly, like in a few lines to summarize, my research was to see, essentially it was about to understand the genealogical relationships of the typefaces created in Istanbul, and then to see how those typefaces got exported to various countries and regions, and how that influenced Arabic and Turkish Arabic and Turkish typography and printing. And so I would say then I printed and mentioned all of these typefaces that were printed in various regions that used Ottoman Naskh typefaces, and their versions too I found, and then I listed all of these things in the book that just came out today. This is the book, so you may, if you want to learn more, if you're interested in more about the Ottoman overall typography and the type making, I had written a much longer book chapter there. And 30 seconds, Hajjak, bear with me. This is a conference that I'm organizing in 2 weeks in Istanbul. It's on Arabic typography.
next week, actually, no?
No, 2 weeks.
Oh.
It's also free admissions. If you happen to be in Istanbul, don't forget to register your seat, and then I hope to see you in Istanbul maybe.